And I knew that if I had quit, I would have never been able to face those men, much less my classmates, ever again. And that's when I decided, yeah, I'm miserable. This sucks, but that's worse. So quitting's worse. And that's when you know you've beaten whatever the challenge you have in life, when you're willing to look, comfort and peace in the eye and say, that's not worth it, because pride is forever. Pain is temporary, pride is forever.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazzo, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with a SEAL. Today we have a fantastic guest, a retired Navy SEAL, commander, and combat veteran with more than 25 years of special operations experience. He served as the coordinator of hostage working group at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq, during the height of Al-Qaeda, served as a COIN advisor for the commander of all NATO international security forces and U.S. forces in Afghanistan. He was on SEAL Team 3 and is now a lecturer at the Joint Special Operations University. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Dan O'Shea. Thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast.
Pleasure to be here, Gina. Looking forward to today.
Thanks for I'm so excited. I have so many things I want to ask you. First of all, we're going to get into why you're here, as this is Mindset Lessons from the Field. I interview special operations, and as you are one of them, one of my biggest questions I want to ask you is, I was listening to some interviews with you, and you mentioned you did a mini buds prior to actually going to buds. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Summer of 1990. Everyone in their summer trainings out of the academies gets a chance to go basically experience the fleet. I got to go to jump school. I got to go, I made it into go scuba school. You can do those kind of things in preparation of what you want to do when you graduate. And one of the options for all future SEAL officers out of the academy, they have to go through a 3-week version of buds. It's 3 weeks, not 26 weeks. But they put you through a 36-hour slice of hell week, and they call it Heck Day, but it's a pretty good wake-up call. And if you can survive 36 hours of 24/7 abuse by the buds instructors, then you might have it in your gut to make it through a whole week of hell on the beaches in Coronado.
You mentioned that after doing that mini buds, you kind of questioned if you can make it through 26 weeks.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, buds is a kick in the jimmy every single day. I mean, literally from the moment you wake up till the end of the day, which is after midnight in some of the phases. And it's mini buds was a wake up call. I mean, physically I could handle the running, the swimming and whatnot. I had a swimming background from high school. I was on the Navy lightweight crew team, which I woke up every morning 4:45 to start my day for a year, on the Severn. I built up that toughness and resiliency, but, buds is a different thing. 4 guys from the class ahead of me, 2 guys that I knew from the crew team had both quit in the first 24 hours in Hell Week. And I thought those guys, they were bigger, stronger. Sure, I thought they were tougher than me. And it made me question, could I handle, 25 weeks, 26 weeks of actually of buds training? I wasn't sure. And it really came down to a personal story and someone that's kind of been with me my entire career, and someone I've always, his spirit I've carried on is a guy named John Patrick Connors, whose bracelet I still carry and wear today. It was my senior at the academy, and an article had come out about Connors, and I had heard his name because a year earlier, I walked into my dad's studio over Christmas in December of 1989, and I approached my father and I said, Dad, I'm doing this thing this summer called Mini Buds. And not 10 minutes after sharing that bit of information with my father, there was a news flash that the U.S. had invaded Panama. And again, you remember the details. You're, younger than me, but back in the day when there were 12 channels, ABC News, CBS, I think CNN was just coming around, but that was it. And there wasn't 24/7 newscast beyond CNN. And the details that came in 89 were limited at best. But over the coming days and weeks, we found out about the first 4 casualties of the war, which was in that opening announcement. So I just told my dad I want to be a SEAL. And the news goes to Andrews Air Force Base, where 4 flag draped coffins with 4 SEALs that were killed that day were brought home. And it was kind of a wake up call to the reality of what I was considering to go do. And 6 months later, or maybe 9 months later, after going through many buds, experienced how tough buds was going to be, there was an article that came out in Reader's Digest about, it was titled Measure of a Man, and was about Lieutenant Junior Grant John Patrick Connors. And that story struck a chord with me. And I just decided the life he led is the life I want to follow. And I said, if I can join that fraternity and that brotherhood of men, then the rest of my life will have purpose and meaning. And that's ultimately, once I knew in my gut and my heart, that's what I was going to go do. And that, again, the path to buds is a long path. It's not something you make because you read a book or saw a movie. It's a long path. And, the saying in the teams is everyone wants to be a frogman on a sunny day, but those guys don't survive. They don't get through the training. That's why it's still an 80% failure rate, no matter how much they try and re-engineer the training. And, you can't predict who's going to make it through training. You got frogmen that are 5'5", upwards of 6'5", and everything in between. And, but everyone's got to have a personal fire in the gut beyond just the idea of being a SEAL. And those are the men that make it through the training.
When you went to actual buds after doing that mini buds, and you decided and you made that choice, like, I'm gonna do this, what was going through your mind when you were ready to go do the actual training?
To be honest, when we showed up, and I showed up with 6 other classmates from the academy, we got right into it. I classed up not 10 days after showing up, because physically, all the academy officers, we had to compete against about 60, 70 other guys to get one of those 20 billets, 19 for the class of 1991. And I realized that I was physically ready for buds. I put in the workouts. I was a strong swimmer, strong runner, and I could do the PT. And I'm not saying I realized that fears and apprehension I had about buds, even before I classed up, were kind of put in my river, because I put in the time, and I knew what going to mini buds the summer before, I knew what it was to be. I knew what surf torture was. I knew what it was like to roll around on the sand and become a sand dummy, and as a sugar cookie, as they called it, and to deal with that kind of abuse. But it's everything leads up to Hell Week. And I was in a Smurf crew. I was the leader of a Smurf crew, and of course, Smurf crews take a lot of abuse and punishment, because we're smaller than everyone else, and we struggle with the IBSs, or the rubber boats, and we were virtually losing every race. And everything in buds is a competition. Every evolution, it pays to be a winner, and if you finish first or second, they let you rest. And then one by one, and if you're at the bottom of the barrel in terms of where you're finishing on any evolution, and as a Smurf crew, we were finishing last in everything. I had 3 foreign officers from Singapore who would pretend to not speak English when I needed to give them guidance and ask them to do something. I had some guys from the deep South who were not the smartest tools in the shed, and they struggled with certain things, and physically, we definitely couldn't out PT anyone. So, and I took a lot of the abuse, because at buds, as the saying goes by the instructors, there's not a team problem. There's a leadership problem. And that's one of the onuses you carry as an officer going through buds. You're responsible for that boat crew. And if the boat crew is failing, you are the one that's responsible, not the men itself. And it's important, because, buds was not easy by any stretch, but mentally and physically, all my academy peers, we were prepared for it. And proof's in the pudding. Every classmate of mine from the Naval Academy made it through training, all 19 guys. And we had a number of guys that came out from service warfare community and others, and came into buds later on and went through. So we had, whereas there's an 80% failure rate in buds, we had a 100% success rate for my class. So it's a testament to the academy. It's a testament to the SEAL officer, Lieutenant Commander Randy Rhodes, and Chief Rich Black, who inspired me, and they got us mentally and physically ready for buds. And that's really hats off to those guys. But it wasn't like we didn't put in the hours of PT and the runs and just preparation. So if you put your work in, you'll be ready for whatever life and or Uncle Sam or Mother Nature can throw at you, but it doesn't come without hard work and effort. And you got to you got to grind and put in the work.
How did you deal with, I mean, you mentioned you were losing a lot, and it was all on you because you were the leader in charge. So what was going on in your mind, and how are you able to channel that into success, and instead of beating yourself up for, or maybe you were beating yourself up for losing all the time? Like, what was going on there?
Well, I mean, to be honest, sometimes you got to make hard choices. One guy in my boat crew, Shoemaker, the guy complained about everything. Every boat crew has that one guy that's that voice of that voice of fear, that voice of apprehension or cancer, if you will. And every evolution we're going on, you'd hear him in the back. The boat would be on our head, it'd be bouncing, it's hurting, and you'd hear him complain. And you're like, man, this evolution is going to be cold. That water's going to be dark, and I don't want to do this. And I'd be like, Shoemaker, shut the hell up. Shoemaker, shut the fuck up. I mean, it was a constant battle to tell him, because that cancer grows. If you let that seed of doubt spread, it becomes a poison and it just destroys the body. And that's what a boat crew, you're never more than 6 feet away from your swim buddy. You're always with your boat crew. And it's to the point that up to Hell Week, he stuck through the first 5 weeks of training. We got to Hell Week, but after we got the Hell Week prep talk from the Master Chief, Rick Nepper, who was a Vietnam era Master Chief, who gave us this motivational speech, and then they put us into the tents to go to sleep until Hell Week broke out. So we had only a few hours before Hell Week. And this isn't a good officer. I mean, sometimes you got to make the hard decisions as an officer. And I literally pulled Shoemaker aside and I said, Shoemaker, you know it. I know it. You're going to quit. Do us a favor now so we can replace you and get someone else in the boat crew. And I literally am an officer telling my guy to quit, which doesn't sound like good leadership 101. But sometimes you have to make those decisions and tell someone, hey, you're not cut out for this job. And ultimately he said, no, sir, I'm motivated. Master Chief got me fired up. I want to be a frogman. I said, okay, Shoemaker, we'll see. So to his credit, he went 24 hours. In fact, my Buzz class went 24 hours. As I recall, we didn't lose a guy in Hell Week in the first 24 hours. Normally you lose half the class during breakout, but we had really good leadership from Lieutenant John Halfick, who's the class leader. And we had 2 ensigns in every boat crew from the Naval Academy and ROTC program. So we had good leadership, and no one quit in the first 24 hours, which is uncommon. And frankly, we didn't lose a lot during Hell Week, but the first guy to quit was Shoemaker. And Shoemaker, it was 24 hours in. We did this evolution called laundry, where you literally strip down piece of clothing by piece of clothing, run out in the Pacific Ocean, and you pretend wash it in the surf zone. And then you come back up on the beach and you fold it properly and you set it on the beach next to your boots. And then one by one, each article of clothing comes off, but you stand there for about 10, 15 minutes as this 2-hour evolution of surf torture and hypothermia comes in effect. And then as you sit there standing, shivering, you dry off, you warm up a little bit, and then they put you back in the water to take off another article of clothing. So it's torturous. And when we got down to our skivvies, literally we're down to the last thing that's coming off. And now we know we're going to sit in the water until literally sit for, 45 minutes to an hour. And this is, 60 degree water temp, 658. And right as we were locking arms to take seats, and everyone's seen that image if you've watched any documentaries on the SEALs, Shoemaker breaks away from my boat crew and starts running up to the beach to quit. And guys from other boat crews try to tackle him and say, don't do it. And my whole boat crew was like, let him go. Like, because we wanted him out. True story. I mean, we literally said, Shoemaker, good riddance, right? And here's the irony. This is the moment when people go, when did you know you're making it through, Buds? It's when they brought Shoemaker down to the water line, and we're now in the water probably 40 minutes at this point, maybe 50 minutes. And I'm hyping out. I'm skinny. I was barely 150 pounds. I 5% body fat or less. I mean, I had no body fat whatsoever when I was going through Buzz, and really no one does it. Only a handful of everyone's skinny in training because they're all young, 18 to 22-year-olds, kind of the average age. And I am hyping out. I'm mentally going through the symptoms, and I am hyping out, and I'm freezing, and I'm miserable. But when they brought Shoemaker down to the water line, they had a wool blanket over his shoulders, a donut in one hand, and a cup of hot cocoa in the other. You could see the steam rising. And the instructor brought him down to the water line and said, to my class, 179, this could be you. Army wool blanket, hot cup of cocoa, a nice Dunkin's donut. Who wants to come up and join Shoemaker here on the beach? And I'm telling you, at that very moment, the 58 dudes left in my class was like, not only no, but hell no. And I mentally reflected myself, projected myself from shoemaker's position to look down on the water line. And there were the 58 of my classmates, as I recall, 58. I think we started at 59 in Hell Week. And I was thinking of the 7 classmates from the Naval Academy who are friends to this day. And I knew that if I had quit, I would have never been able to face those men, much less my classmates ever again. And that's when I decided, yeah, I'm miserable. This sucks, but that's worse. So quitting's worse. And that's when you know you've beaten whatever the challenge you have in life, when you're willing to look, comfort and peace in the eye and say, that's not worth it, because pride is forever. Pain is temporary, pride is forever, which is something you hear a lot in buds. But that was the moment for me that I think just resonated with me. And again, I can think of 101 stories from what I learned in some of these moments in buds, and that Hell Week experience 24 hours into it was a defining moment. And from that point forward, I had tough days and bad days, but I never ever thought, I knew at that point, quitting was never an option for me. And again, all my classmates from the academy and most of my class, because we graduated a good group of guys, because we had the right mindset, we had great leadership, and and I look back fondly. And when you're laughing at buds, when you're getting hammered, and I mean physically, you get tortured in buds training. I mean, from day up to day down, every phase is tough, every phase gets harder, and they're constantly screwing with you. But when you're going to lunch after a morning brutal session and you're laughing over chow hall, what had happened to you 15 minutes earlier, or what happened to one guy in the class, when you can laugh during training at lunchtime or in between the breaks, then you have it beat. And that's the power of the mind, because as we finally figured out, the human body can do so much more than 99% of us give credit for. And I think the 1%, and it's not just SEALs, it's certainly across the spectrum in special operations, but you've got endurance athletes out there, and some of the toughest people on the planet that I met over my years doing adventure racing were the female athletes who, trust me, have better endurance than most men. I certainly can, hell, we can't push a basketball out of our belly. You guys can. So the pain tolerance for women is very high. So that mental toughness I've seen in all walks of life ever since. And again, it crystallizes that experience in buds, but it's not unique to the teams, nor unique to military men only, if you will. I've seen it across many genres and many personalities, and regardless of gender or whatnot. Mental toughness is something that everyone can hone, and especially when you tie it to your physicality, it's the same thing.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by my absolute favorite company. If you know me or seen videos or photos of me, then you know I always have one on my wrist. I absolutely adore this company, DiscoverOmnia.com. DiscoverOmnia.com is the world's first smart crystal bracelet. Every single bracelet is handmade in the USA using real, genuine crystals made on memory wire. Every bracelet is unisex, and they're also aromatherapy. The cool part is the black onyx charm that is on the bracelet. It scans to your cell phone, connecting you to their Wellness Hub Elevate. You can also access their Wellness Hub Elevate on your computer or tablet. You just have to sign into your account. The bracelet gives you a 12-month membership. It has over 200 pieces of self-care content, from motivational tips, meditations, breathing exercises around the theme of your bracelet, printable journals, and so much more. The content is ever growing. And that's not all. The bracelet also gives you lifetime access to their Elevate Together Club, which meets monthly via Zoom. Each month is themed, giving you actionable takeaways to elevate your life. And with this podcast episode, you got 40% off your purchase order by using the code Mindset Podcast. Use that code Mindset Podcast for 40% off. Just go to DiscoverOmnia.com. DiscoverOmnia.com, code Mindset Podcast for 40% off. Get your bracelet today. How do you push through that pain? Like, how do you develop that mental toughness? Was there something that you did prior to it? Like, I mean, just being in the water, freezing cold, like about to hit hypothermia, and how do you just stay in that?
For me, it goes back. I mean, I think the mental aspect for me when the Naval Academy, I was on the crew team. We had to get up every morning at 4:45, run a mile out to the boathouse, do an hour and a half on the water, and then run back to class from 07:55 till 3:15 in the afternoon. Rush back and then do another 3 hours at the boathouse. So I was doing 3-4 hours a day outside of my academic load, and that daily grind. And Gina, I never made the crew team. I was too small. I was frankly, I was not going to be a coxswain, but I wanted to row, even though I never really made first or second boat. But I got up every day. I didn't want to go to practice, after 2 hours of sleep studying for a double E exam that I had at 10 in the morning. But I went out to the boathouse. I didn't call my coach or text my coach, which didn't exist because there weren't cell phones back in the day, and say, "Oh, coach, I can't make it today. I got an important test I got to take at 7:55 on my first period." No, you grind it. You grind. You get up every day. You do the things you don't want to do, and if you create that pattern of resistance in your life and discipline, then you can handle when you're confronted with those challenges. To the point where, like, you feed off the energy. In fact, when Shoemaker quit and other guys in my class, when you beat someone that you thought was bigger, stronger than you feed off that. You take that energy away. So it's resiliency. And I just think we don't teach that anymore. We've created a whole generation, not the Gen Xers. We teach these kids to, like, take it easy. If you don't feel good, you can't pay attention, here, take a pill. No, we have got to get back to resiliency, because resiliency is so important. I mean, that's how you build up immune systems. I mean, good God, the way we addressed the COVID crisis in this country was just absurd. And we created a nation of people that want to go the easy way out. And I'm just sorry, buds is hard for a reason. It's tough for a reason. And we have these pressures to try and reduce the severity of these pipelines because everyone else has accepted a lower standard. And I'm sorry, but the real world doesn't give everyone a trophy in the real world. When you leave high school or college at 18, you don't get things handed to you. And we're seeing this plethora of these kids making these little complaining videos about having to work a 9 to 5 job or having to add in an hour commute on each end because they can't afford the apartment in the city where they want to go hang out on the weekends because they're still using daddy's credit card to pay for $20 drinks and whatnot. No, the real world is tough. And that's one thing I loved about the military is that I got to go through BUDS training. I was fortunate enough to go to the academy, but I met kids from all walks of life, corn-fed kids from the Midwest, inner city kids from LA, from New York, Chicago that wanted to escape certain things. And they had this certain mental toughness, not the same path I had. Everyone's path is different, but they still made it through the training because they wanted something more and they were willing to suffer for it. And we need to encourage those things. I mean, this whole notion that male toxicity is a bad thing, my God, is absurd. And now we're seeing the results of, a society that wants to, put up weak men. And I mean weak men and weak human beings. It's the same thing. And that famous saying, hard men make good time make weak men make bad times. And we're living in that today. And we need to get back to, old school toughness and raise our kids with discipline and respect for authority. And, we're seeing the results of not having be held accountable. And the fact that you can attack someone on social media and hide and not even use your real name, back in the day, you said something to someone, you're gonna pay for it on the school ground later. And I'm not advocating violence and certainly not bullying by any stretch, but we need to get back to building resiliency, both in our physicality and our mental mindset, because, if you are as a male or female are an alpha, if you were raised proper, you're going to crush it because your competition they're all betas and whatever it could be worse than that. And I think that that's a one benefit and pleasure I have from I not only I thrived in BUDS after Hell Week, and I enjoy. I mean, I wanted to compete. I look forward to every time I did it another combat conditioning run or something. I wanted to compete. I always wanted to finish in the top 5, the top 10, or first. I was just competitive, and that's what I loved about the teams. it was so hyper competitive, and that's what, and you thrive on that. And that's what and even though I don't have the physicality, I can't do the things physically I did 25 years ago, but I still have the mental toughness, and that never goes away from you. And I think that's critical that we bring that type of mentality back to how we build, raise kids today, and just live life today, if you will.
You mentioned leadership a lot in the very beginning and how everything falls on the leader. Did you have a sense of teamwork and leadership prior to going into Buds, or was it something that you kind of developed through failure and losing and all that?
Well, I mean, I'm one of 7 kids in a big Irish Catholic family, and I'm the smallest of 4 boys. I'm literally the runt of the litter. I'm short. My brother's an inch taller than me, so I had to scrap for everything in life growing up. And but I don't know. I just never let it mentally. I chose things as a young kid. I got involved in Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout by age 12. I got involved in student government school. I ran for office. Within my class, I went to Boys State, and I chose, and I love reading. I mean, my biggest thing, and that's why I was a history major. I love reading military history. I read about leadership from the Greeks, the Romans, to the age of chivalry, to the Plains Wars, to Civil War, and then World War I, World War II. In fact, I knew before I got into high school that I wanted to go to a service academy. I wanted that challenge. Now, just because you get into Annapolis, well, you're a leader amongst your classmates, because obviously you don't get into a service academy without having a pretty widespread resume that is strong in academic sports, but you've got to show leadership. And so I always consider myself a student in leadership. So there was no better place for that than going to the academy and going to Buds. But I was constantly honing that. And I think charisma, certain people have innate charisma. And one thing that I've never been afraid of is public speaking, which terrorizes people. It's something that I've done since I delivered our valedictorian address out of high school, and so I don't know, but I think I had some of that. But no, I'm still a student of leadership, and I'm not perfect, and I have areas to improve upon. But I got my master's in executive leadership specifically because I think that's something that I've been drawn to, and I think it draws that type of man and woman that wants to go serve. And you're gonna be put in a leadership position regardless of what rank you come in the military. Not right away, because even as enlisted and young officers, but by the time 4 or 5 years rolls around, if you're still serving the military as a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain, you're going to be leading men and women, and you should look forward to those challenges. And it's the military; they groom that to. That's why we have, when men and women make colonel and or flag officer, general or admiral, they're pretty impressive human beings across the board. And it's all because we've all been students of leadership almost probably throughout most of our life, and certainly from the day we joined the military.
Was there an area that you struggled with at all throughout your time at Buds?
Yeah, you've got doubts about, evolutions in leadership. Like I said, my boat crew challenges in the first phase were pretty tough. In fact, most of those guys that, in fact, the only one guy made it through. The Singaporean guys made it through the training, but the only one other guy from my boat crew made it through. And so the dead weight kind of fell off by the way. So, like I said, the biggest challenge of Bud was just the daily grind. But you always had, even when you get to the SEAL team, here's an example. What I loved about the teams, you had to prove yourself every day. When I finished Buds on a Friday, I showed up to SEAL Team 3 on a Monday, and everyone there was like, when I showed up the quarterdeck, I was in uniform, I had my service record, my medical record. I walked up to the quarterdeck, the guy's in his Cracker Jacks, his Navy SEAL uniform, and I saluted him on the quarterdeck inside the building. And you don't salute inside buildings. Well, at least, he didn't salute me back. He just looked at me like, I said, Ensign O'Shea reporting as ordered. And he just looked at me like, go to admin, sir. And he presses a buzzer. So it was kind of like, it wasn't like, hey man, welcome to the teams. How you doing, bro? Good to meet you. None of that. I mean, literally, I had guys at the team that didn't talk to me for the first 6 months because to them, I was an FNG. I was a fucking new guy. And until you prove yourself, everyone else has already been to Buds. And that's the one thing about the teams. Like, yes, it is a brotherhood, but it's an earned brotherhood. And it's not something that you get brought into immediately into the fold. I mean, you have to earn that respect of those guys, whatever platoon or team you're working at. Your reputation's everything, but you have to prove yourself, as we call it on the teams. You got to earn your trident every day, and you make mistakes. I made mistakes in my career, like we all do, but you learn from those mistakes. But you've got some very unsympathetic older brothers that they're gonna steer you in the right direction, and sometimes that direction means some more than just counseling, if you will. And so even though I love being in the teams, there was always that fear of something could go wrong. There could it could be a liberty incident involving alcohol, which in my day in the 90s, because we weren't in combat, that happened more often. In fact, alcohol and women ruin more careers than anything else I know. Which one of the benefits, ironically enough, for me at being attached to SEAL Team 3, we deployed to the Middle East for 6 months where there's no alcohol and no women. So it was almost a blessing in disguise, even though those deployments were pretty boring sometimes in terms of liberty, because there was really no liberty. But it also meant that your career wasn't going to end up on the cover of Navy Times because your platoon got into a bar fight somewhere over some guy's girlfriend or something, which happened quite frequently. But and I don't think I would have survived in an era of social media and cell phones and all the old generation guys. We get together and we're very thankful that social media and or cell phones did not exist when we were serving. But that just comes with the territory.
How did you prove yourself after 6 months being with the team?
It's like I said, everything in the team is based on your platoons and deployments. And it honestly, I don't think you feel like you're a SEAL till you've done 2 deployments, and usually it's by your third. And then as an officer, that's it's my third platoon when I became the platoon commander. But like you get groomed for it. It's you learn from every deployment, and at about the 5-year mark in the teams, you've kind of your reputation is either it's proven or it's not. And but then there's other teams to go to. There's always skill sets. And even everything we do on the teams is perishable, from our shooting skills, jumping, diving. So you've got to constantly hone that. And so you're constantly in a process of trying to improve yourself. And that's both mentally and physically, and challenging yourself. And I think that becomes a lifetime for anyone who goes through the soft pipeline. They're constantly knowing that, hey man, I might have been really good at that yesterday, but today's a new day, and I gotta go prove it today as well.
When you were in Buds and then being in the SEAL team and everything, what kind of was there pressure that there's a lot of pressure there in general, because at any point, especially like through performance, you could just be dropped. Is that correct? Like you don't have to ring out. Like if you're just not performing, you could just go. Is that correct?
Listen, there is an attrition rate even in the teams, not very high. But if like for example, if you're an officer that doesn't show the potential, you just won't get a platoon commander tour. And then you kind of shown the door after about 4 or 5 years. So that's kind of a benchmark, I think, at least for the officer side. But the same with enlisted. It's usually liberty issues. If someone gets into a liberty incident, like alcohol related, then that can end a guy's career. Like a DUI, you could survive a DUI in the 90s. You wouldn't survive a DUI, driving while intoxicated, in this day and age. So it's but it's if you get in trouble, a CO can write you a letter that would end your career. So there's always a weeding process. So you can never take the fact that you earn your trident for granted. And like I said, it's the saying is, you earn your trident every day. So you're held up to a very high standard. And some guys, I talked to someone who, they screened for development group, and he said, we had guys that basically they walked away from after going through the training, they turned it in. They basically said, hey, I'm not good enough to be here. So everyone's their own worst critic, but everyone, if you're honest, can look themselves in the mirror and know that, hey, am I physically, mentally up for this challenge? And that's usually, the hardest thing to want to admit that, you maybe are not cut out for this anymore. And eventually everyone has a shelf life. The average SEAL on average does about 10, 12 years. And then the lifers stay for 20, 25, and even 30. But, it's a grind, and it comes with a cost. And you know, we have a certain amount of guys that, we look at them like they're kind of like, loosely termed, even called, the guys that go on a dam neck. Those are the true warriors. Those are the true ones that Hercules talk. I can't. It's not Hercules, but a Greek philosopher talked about. There's in 100 warriors, for 100 men, there will be 10 that will bring that home. Of those 10, 9 are phenomenal fighters, but there is that one, and that one brings all the men home. I'm paraphrasing, but
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're.
and those are the guys that go screen for dam neck, and then they spend their entire career. And I have buddies that are in their 50s, and they retired after 20, 25 years in the teams, and then went on to another organization to continue doing what they were doing. And it's those are the very few, and those are the guys that we all look up to and have tremendous respect for, because those guys truly stayed at the path of war and the path of perfecting their craft from every aspect of it, from being an assaulter, a sniper, a troop leader, troop commander. And so we recognize that even within our breed, there's a special cut above, and thank God we have them, because those are the men that are keeping this country safe from the wolves that are at our gates.
Did you have any moment or point where you almost didn't make it, or like you had a just kind of like a close call for yourself?
I mean, no, not once I got to the team. I mean, I certainly had my fair share of challenges, especially in the first couple platoons. But like I said, you get tough love in the teens, but if the guy that when you're not being challenged or abused by your leadership, or questioned, then the concern is, well, they put their time and effort into molding you. Like, if you're making, like I said, I made plenty of mistakes. We all make plenty of mistakes, but when you have to worry when the leadership in your platoon or the command, then they don't take an interest in you, and then that's when you need to be concerned. But like I said, I don't have any one moment or incident where I thought everything was going to fall apart on my career, what have you. But when I finished a platoon commander tour, it was in 1998, and I'd done everything I wanted to do in the teams. We weren't in combat anywhere, and I realized, okay, there's other things I want to do. So when I made the transition, largely because we weren't at war, and I thought, okay, there's other things I can go do. I was getting heavily involved in the endurance events called adventure racing. I was doing these 200, 300, 400-mile races around the world, and I was helping organize them, and that's what I wanted to jump into. But the reality is, when 9/11 happened, I literally looked at my roommate, who was a fellow SEAL, and we were building a business together. And on that day, I simply looked at him and I said, Al Qaeda. And before the day was done, there was an email that went out to every SEAL, former, past, and present, and to the reservists. And I wasn't even in the reserves, but it said, "Hey guys, we need you back. We're going to war." And I was on the phone with a Navy recruiter on September 12th, back in the military a week later, and mobilized a month later. And then, I did another 20 plus years. So, when the nation was at war, the warriors who were committed to it, we came back and we did our part. And I look back and, I don't have any regrets. I mean, I can say that how Iraq and Afghanistan turned out, definitely not how, we envisioned it. And it's hard sometimes thinking of teammates that died in both areas, but they died doing a job that needed to be done, and amongst brothers that they would have jumped on a grenade for. I mean, Mikey Mansour did that for his teammates and Team 3 teammates. So, I was, like I said, from going back to John Patrick Connors, my decision to go to the teams was based on a guy that got killed in combat. And that's something that we still need to, as long as we still have young men and women willing to sign up and want to go serve, then we will be okay as a nation. But my concern is that we're not doing that. And I mean, hell, there's only 25% of the average 18-year-old in America can even qualify for boot camp today, with all the issues with, prescribed Ritalin and ADHD and mental health issues that young kids are dealing with, and being force fed all this woke nonsense. It's doing a big disservice. And that's where I'm concerned, because I don't have the same faith in in the military that I once had, at least not on the big Navy and big Army side. I just hope to God that woke disease hasn't infected the teams, both SOF, SF, Rangers, Marines and whatnot. But I fear it has to a certain extent.
You mentioned, prior, you talked about we talked about the pre-buds and then, actually going to buds. And when you thinking back, when you started in pre-buds, when you were going through everything as the mini buds, was there and you said, I don't know if I'm going to, afterwards, you're like, I don't know if I could get through the actual buds. What was the biggest wake up call for you? And then when you decided to make the choice of I'm going to go to buds, did you, besides physicalness, was there something that you knew you needed to work on or develop in order to get you through buds? Because like you mentioned, it's all mindset and the body can get pushed through anything. So what was those big wake up calls for you in those pre-buds? That did you look back at it at all in when you were in actual buds? Am I making sense?
Well, listen, I had questions about, everyone was asking me about, am I going to buds? I got that my plebe summer, when we had this little PT competition in the academy called the Iron Plebe, and I was the Iron Plebe for India Company. It was like a pull-up, push-up, mile and a half run competition, what have you. And I scored really high, and I was the Iron Plebe for my company. And my plebe year roommate looked at me and said, "Hey, man, do you want?" Because he was in the Navy. His brother actually was a diver in the Navy, had gone to buds, and quit during Hell Week. But this guy was a prior Navy sailor, and when he found out I had swam in high school, said, "Hey, man, do you want to be a Navy SEAL?" Now this is 1987, before internet, before movies and books, and I literally said, "I go, what the hell's a Navy SEAL?" And when he started describing to me the training in Hell Week in particular, I thought, how the hell could I go through a week-long training without sleep? I just mentally, I wasn't there. But again, I joined the crew team, and half the guys on the crew team either wanted to be Marines or Navy SEALs. So I was around that culture, and it just slowly, built, that mindset on me, because physically I could outrun most anyone. I could certainly do as many pull-ups and push-ups as the next guy. But it was over the course of literally finding that cause and that purpose. And that was for me, John Patrick Connors. I wanted to honor this guy, and I want to be part of that fraternity. And once I had my reason, right? Everyone's got to have that reason. You can't just say, I want to be a SEAL or I want to be this or that. You've got to have that reason that's going to make you stick it out. And for me, it became wanting to be a part of that fraternity that to me was represented by John Patrick Connors. And listen, every team guy, especially post 9/11, most of us have multiple guys. Like I knew Michael Murphy and I served together at Sox Scent. So we continue to live our lives, based on men that we knew were bigger than us, better than us, stronger than us, men of character who laid their life down for this country. And it's, that's why we continue to go on. That's why guys continue to do multiple deployments. It just becomes part of your DNA. So I think once you find that reason why you want to serve, you don't look back. And, when I was younger, the thought that I was whatever, never made it through buds never came into my mind once I got there, if you will. And I've always said this, and I think this is important. I think it goes to what you're maybe trying to ask. I've mentored hundreds of young men that want to go to buds. They've all met me, and I've spent time with them. I've talked to them. I've done a lot with the ROTC students and some of the academy kids. And I've always said to them, half the challenge of getting through buds is getting to buds, meaning you got to compete to get a slot to go to buds. Buds is not something you just walk into the Navy recruiter's office and say, "Hey, I want to be a Navy SEAL." They don't send you to Coronado a week later. You got to go to boot camp. You have to take a screening, and then you have to compete in that screening. And if you don't make the baseline measurements of the standards, you're not getting a shot. So then you're going to spend 4 years in the Navy shipping paint on some tin can off the coast of, Hawaii, and you're going to be miserable. So again, if you do the preparation, both physical and mental, to get to buds, now it's on you. And it's a voluntary program. The instructors say that all the time. It takes 2 words to end your Navy SEAL career. 2 words and 2 words only. I quit. I DOR. I drop on request. That's it. I quit. 2 words. And I will say that a classmate, one of the guys from the class of 90, who I have a lot of respect for him. And I didn't know him at the academy, but he was one of the four that quit in that 24-hour period. And it was a shocker because the guy was an all-American athlete. He was a stud. The guy was he was a very impressive guy. And a year after quitting during Hell Week, he came and talked to all the ensigns from the academy, and he did it to my class. There were 7 of us that showed up. He talked to us about what got into his mindset, why he quit. He said, I let that little seed of doubt get in and become a voice that kept growing. And when Joe quit and Billy started thinking about it, then it just became this like, who could rush to the gate to quit? And he said, I think about that every day of my life. It's the biggest regret. You do not want to be me. And those are those motivational things to realize that, you know, if your body fails you in training, okay. Like if you get medically dropped, I get it. And I know plenty of guys that didn't make it through training, not because they quit, because the body failed on them, but they went out, on an O course till their knee popped or something. But they don't, it bothers them even to this day, years later. But I tell you, the ones that really fade away and I've met guys that quit during Hell Week or, quit during buds, and they have a hard time talking about it because it affects them for the rest of their life. Like I said, resiliency is really important. And there's some things worse than pain and being cold and wet and hungry. And that's ego. And I think we need to encourage that and build up strong male, egos to overcome adversity and not quit and not think that, life's supposed to be easy, because it's not.
You mentioned that when you got out, you were starting a business, and then before you got pulled back in. How was your transition from what you learned as a SEAL in civilian life and business?
You get a lot of good lessons from the military and business life, but it is hard making that transition. The transition is hard for every soldier that leaves, especially something like the teams. Team 3, I'd look in the mirror sometimes as I got dressed in the locker room, and I just sometimes couldn't believe I was at the teams. I would look at my trident and be like, "Man, I am part of this fraternity. I just love it here." And it's something that's hard because every guy that leaves the teams, I don't care. And I know some guys that left, especially my era, they went off to get MBAs from Harvard, Yale. They, law school degrees out of Yale, Stanford. I mean, top programs in the country. And then they go on to Wall Street or wherever, hugely successful careers. And I can tell you, every team guy that spent time in either the Strand or Virginia Beach in the Creek, they regret that they're no longer in the teams. They really do. So that business transfer, it's never the same. It's really hard for guys to make that transition because just nothing measures up to the adrenaline rush you get being in the teams every day. But you learn a lot of lessons, and I think that's why it makes SEALs pretty darn successful. And they're probably more successful in the entrepreneurial side of the house than in the actual corporate, because I have plenty of buddies that did the corporate route, but ultimately all of them found a way to go find a way to niche themselves out. Very few of them stayed in the Fortune 100 type companies because they wanted to go start something on their own. So they would, use those MBA degrees from Wharton or Harvard or whatnot to leverage a good opportunity. But as soon as I got enough knowledge, they would go out on their own or launch their own company. So there's a lot of it, but everyone, you'll never be surrounded in a company like you with the talent and the kind of guys that are going to challenge you every day that you had in the teams. But there are important lessons learned, but really it just comes down to, being a leader, man. Set the vision, you craft the mission statement or the mantra that everyone lives by, and then you create the priorities of what the focus is of the business, and you establish the values of the company, and then you live by those values. And the teams are, Navy is honor, courage, and commitment, and people live and die by the ethos and the SEAL ethos. And I think, even myself, I wrote a Warrior's Creed, and I refined it after my MBA, Master's in Executive Leadership program, and I use that as a guiding principle for, a tech company I was involved with for a number of years, and other companies I've helped stand up and start. So, but all those principles, they came out of buds, they came out of Ranger School, and they are applicable to life. You just have to tweak them a little bit and put on new verbiage and take away the military speak that most people don't understand and put it into, civilian speak, if you will.
Being a Navy SEAL is a very small group and being a successful business owner is also a small group. There's a lot of failure in both areas. And you said Navy SEALs do well as entrepreneurs. They gravitate in that area. So what do you think that they all have in common and bring to the table?
I mean, again, just mental focus, front sight focus, discipline, physicality, which is huge, and just determination and a mindset. I mean, when you get through Bud's training and you do something that no one is supposed to do, right? Go for 5.5 days with 3.5, 4 hours of sleep. Then you have this mindset that's like, I can do anything. I can accomplish anything. And guys are like, I will stay up till the job's done. I mean, and it's just all these little sayings in the teams and in Buds and Hell Week that just stick with you for life. One is none, two is one, where you always have a backup. You never rely on just one set of anything because God forbid that thing fails. So you always have a backup plan. You always have multiple courses of action because, no plan survives first contact, and that's in battle and that's in life. So you just train to think like, roll with it. I mean, be prepared to adapt and be adaptable. And that's like the biggest difference between the soft mindset and big Army or big Navy mindset is we are trained to think out of the box and be unconventional. We're expected to go find the route that's unconventional because trust me, everyone in big military wants to put everyone in a box. That's why I don't think SEALs and Green Berets do well in a quote corporate America. I mean, when I hear about the HR policies right now that are in corporate 100 with, woke policies and people forced to put their pronouns in their signature box. I mean, I'll just tell you, when I see pronouns in someone's signature box on LinkedIn when they're trying to friend me, I'm just like, no, I'm not trying to be anti whatever, but I just think that is nonsense. That forcing someone to play by, and that's corporate America. And I think we're starting to see a rejection of all that craziness. But, at the end of the day, come to work prepared, show up on time, do the work, get it done. And you go home when the work is done. You don't quit mid-sentence. You finish the job, you get the task done. And that's what was the best thing when I finally commanded a SEAL platoon, when I gave out guidance, I gave out guidance. I didn't have to give out orders. I never had to look at my guys and say, Jonesy, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. I would say, Jonesy, we need to make sure the loadout with all the combat equipment's ready for the deployment. Hey, roger that, sir. I knew he knew. I didn't have to give him a list and tell him, hey, I need this radio, that radio, and this, that, or whatever. No, it was going to be done because I trusted the guys because they had the training. In fact, they're better at all these jobs than I am. All I'm supposed to do as an officer is manage the process. And that was the beauty about having a culture of excellence and high standards. And then sometimes you don't get that in the private sector, but then that means you got to go out and set the example you want others to follow. And leadership's leadership, and people will always follow good leadership. End of the day.
What was like one of the biggest things that you learned out of Buds that you've carried with you your whole entire career, through work, through personal life, like through everything?
Well, it was actually before Buds. When I got into the academy, day one, they walked us in, they shaved our heads, took us out of our khakis and topsiders and polo shirts and put us into a uniform. And they started teaching us how to march, and they marched us in this auditorium. And we got this lecture on Message to Garcia. And Message to Garcia was this kind of parable written about a young Army officer at the turn of the century in the Spanish-American War. There was a rebel leader on Cuba that the U.S. President McKinley wanted to get a message to say that we will support the insurgency against Spain. And that message, they said, we must get it. This message must be delivered to Garcia. So they summoned this Army captain into the War Department and said, Captain Rowan, this letter must be delivered to Garcia. And he walked up, saluted, and said, yes, sir, grabbed the orders in a satchel and left the room. And the point being, he didn't sit there and go, who is Garcia? Where is Garcia? How am I going to find Garcia? It was that you're a young officer, you will go figure it out. Show your independence to think and action on your own. And that mentality, coupled with the reality that Bud's taught me that there's nothing I physically can't do. Failure in your mission is not an option. And I remember I had hoped to go to Bud's and lead men into combat. That was my goal. That's why I went to the academy, why I went to SEAL training. But in the 90s, we were not in conflict, and I moved on with my career until 9/11 hit, because then the nation went to war. And even though I went back on orders for 2.5 years on active duty, and I deployed to Iraq for the invasion, but I was a staff officer. I was doing PowerPoints, briefing generals, not doing this, SEAL work, but I was briefing. But my mission or my message at Garcia moment came at like age 34, 35. I was a lieutenant commander. I accepted one more assignment to go to Iraq. And I showed up at the U.S. Embassy in the summer of 04 at the height of the insurgency. And it was less than a month after a young American, a Jewish kid named Nicholas Berg, who was in Iraq trying to find, some business opportunities. And he was kidnapped and then beheaded by Al-Qaeda, by Zarqawi himself. And I rolled into the embassy right as this crisis, this hostage taking crisis led by Al-Qaeda, was taking over the breaking news headline stories. And I had flown in, I'd worked, I was with a unit at a U.S. Central Command called the Joint Interagency Task Force or Coordinating Group. And it was all basically interagency, including the FBI, the agency, the State Department and others. And I was supposed to go over and be a liaison officer. I wasn't doing a SEAL job. It wasn't anything soft related, but I was supposed to be a liaison officer. And I think I just turned 35 and I had just done, a couple years briefing general officer. So I got that refinement of how to manage that other side of my career, not just leading men into battle, but preparing generals for war and being part of that staff officer process. And showed up at the embassy in July of 04. And in literally the second meeting of the day, an ambassador was talking about these two truck drivers from Bulgaria that had been kidnapped. The fact that Bulgaria had a battalion of soldiers in the coalition, they were a part of the coalition of the willing, that President Bush himself had called the president of Bulgaria and said, hey, you're a valued member of the coalition. We'll do everything we can to save these hostages. And so 2 envoys were flying into Baghdad that day to find out what was being done to rescue these 2. And it was brought up at a State Department meeting with the Pole-Mill ambassador, the political military ambassador. And he sees a problem that involves hostages. And he's got a Navy SEAL who's part of his liaison staff. And he simply turned to me and said, Dan, you're a Navy SEAL, go call your friends. And that's how I got handed this kidnapping crisis. That was my satchel being handed to me, my message to Garcia moment. And from that task became the next 2 years of my life. I ultimately formed an organization called the Hostage Working Group. I wrote its charter, I wrote its mission statement, and I developed its daily priorities that we focused on. Number 1 was rescue recovery of hostages. 2, prevent future kidnappings. And 3, bring those responsible to justice. And I lived by that. Those were the things that drove me for the next 2 years. And that's why the organization grew from, the interagency. I had the intelligence, I had special operations involved, the diplomats, I had counter nations, I had law enforcement. I mean, I literally grew this organization and ultimately, in the height of that summer, the month I got there in July, there were 31 international kidnappings. It went to 46, and then 54. So literally in the 3 months of this tour, and I was only supposed to be there for the summer, I dealt with 2 to 3 kidnappings every day. And I'm running around with my head cut off. And it was a crisis. But in the middle of that crisis, by staying focused on the mission, we eventually got out a campaign to advise people about the threat of kidnapping. So then people were being warned. We'd get advance warning that a group was being targeted. I would go out to them, I'd meet with them and say, hey, you're being targeted by this organization. And so they would, adjust accordingly. And eventually it was exhausting work. I mean, I didn't take a day off. I worked 22 months in a war zone with no time off. In fact, the only time I would come home every 6 months because I had to drill. So I would come home from 6 months being in Iraq. I would drill for 2 weeks. And my drills would be to go around and speak about the hostage crisis. I was speaking at the Pentagon. I was speaking at, SOCOM. I spoke out to Naval Special Warfare. So I would come home for 2 weeks, do my military drill, and then go right back to the war. And I did that for a total of, basically 2 years from 04 to 06. And I was exhausted by the end of the tour because my average day was 20 hours long, and I wasn't sleeping. And I was frustrated because we were not having a lot of successes. In fact, we only had a handful of hostage rescues. In fact, of the 44 Americans taken hostage, we had one hostage rescue mission, one deliberate hostage rescue mission out of the 448 total kidnapping cases, of which 44 American hostages. But I tell you, it wasn't until I looked back on and did the calculations, I realized that By the end of my tour, kidnappings went from 2 to 3 a day down to single digits. In fact, the last 2 months of my tour in March and April of 06, there were only two foreigners taken hostage in the entire month, both months. So we went from an average of 30, 40 kidnappings a day at one point down to, in context with all the kidnappings that were occurring, down to single digits. So the work did pay off, but I didn't, so like I said, I stuck to my SEAL mentality that, I can put in another day. I can survive on no sleep because I've done it before. I did it in college. I did it in the team. So, and I had an important mission, and I took every kidnapping personally. Every morning I'd wake up to a proof of life video of one of the hostages. And I was interviewing these families, these Iraqis that were being kidnapped. And the Iraqi kidnapping crisis was tenfold what the international crisis was. There were probably 5 to 7,500 Iraqis kidnapped every year over my 2 years, and again, 200 per year foreigners. It was a nightmare. I mean, that's why I'm doing all these interviews right now, because until someone does over 400 kidnappings by Islamic terrorist groups like Al Qaeda, you just can't understand what's going on with a group like Hamas. But I do, because the same ideology is there. I mean, in fact, in Fallujah, where a lot of the kidnappings and executions, these beheadings were happening, when the Marines took down Fallujah, like the IDF is trying to do today in Gaza, they came across a house that they found bodies in the house, headless bodies in this house of horrors, this hostage holding house. And they found a manual, a Hamas kidnapping manual that said, it's no need to hunt for lions when there are plenty of sheep to be had. And that was back in 2005, right? So 2004 and 2005. So Hamas has been at this game for a long time, and these groups and this mindset and ideology. And again, I use those proof of life videos and sometimes those execution videos to just steal my resolve and say, I'm going to find these sons of bitches. I'm going to help put them out of business. And we didn't have a lot of success early on, but by the end of my tour, we did, because we addressed the problem set. And ultimately, the one kidnapping ring in particular that I'd chased for 18 months in the last 90 days of my tour, the most capable hostage rescue task force on the planet, took down that ring and wiped them out. And kidnappings went away for a couple of years in Iraq because of aggressive stance by U.S. Special Operations Forces. So, but and it should have happened earlier in my career, or early in that tour. But again, I didn't quit because I don't have quit in me. I mean, you're a team guy, you're a SEAL. That's the most valuable thing I got out of my life from Buds and Hell Week and the teams, is that I will not quit, and no team guy will. And that's something that probably the most important thing I did when I look back and think about, well, what role did I play in the post 9/11 response to the horrors of 9/11 was that. But I got that all from choosing the path I did early on in my life.
What advice do you have for us average everyday civilians listening to this podcast to toughen up, just to become lions in a world of sheep right now? What can we as everyday average civilians do?
Well, you're the company you keep. I mean, find better friends, work with people that challenge you. Find it, make a commitment. If it's getting up and working out 3 days a week, we'll stick to that commitment. I mean, there's plenty of guys out there, and far more articulate team guys than me that have perfected this. I mean, it's so funny. I get questions every time about Jocko. Do you know Jocko? And Jocko was actually a couple classes ahead of me. So, and I'll listen to a Jocko podcast, and I'll get inspired by the stuff that Jocko says, because it reminds me of what other, legendary Buds instructors used to tell us. So, find your motivation. Is it a daily podcast? Is it taking time for yourself, meditation, man, going for a walk? I mean, putting in 10,000 steps a day, making those goals and sticking to them. I mean, they're health goals, I mean, but surround yourself with positive energy, and cut the negative things out of your life, whatever they are. Everything in moderation. I have plenty of improvement with things I can do in my life, and I'm not I can't run anymore. I have a titanium ankle. I've got some back issues, so I've got some physical issues that affect me. But I still try and get my grind in, both mentally and physically. And I just think life is not supposed to be easy. I mean, resilience and resistance build strength. Don't fear away and shy away from it. Go out and embrace it, and embrace the suck. I mean, you're such a better person after that workout, whatever it is. But you need to challenge yourself every day, both physically and mentally, and frankly, you should do things that scare you. And if you do, like, the biggest regret you can have is looking back on your life and having regret. And I think there's 3 chapters in our life. The first chapter is, age 1 till 18 or 19, when we leave our family home, right? We go off to college, we go off into life, and if we go to college, we should challenge everything that our parents, our pastors, our priests, or our professors, teachers taught us, right? We should challenge those things in college. We should be open-minded to different opinions, right? And this nonsense that kids don't want to hear from a quote conservative on campus or think one way, that scares that scares the crap out of me, because college is where you're supposed to go challenge your preconceived notions. And then the next third of your life is you take your life experiences or college education or military service, and then apply that to the middle phase when we go figure out what we are, right? Do we start a family? Or we're going to start a career? And then you get to where I'm at now in my mid-50s to go, okay, I've done the first 2 phases of my life. Now the last third, what's the important? What's going to be the legacy? And the one benefit I do have is I'm not having a midlife crisis at my age. I'm not looking back with regret. And now I feel very fortunate to have had the life I've led and the places I've been. And no, has it been perfect? It has not been perfect. But, the worst times, the hardest times are the ones when I realize, that's when I learned the most. And that's when I toughened up the most for myself. And I've come out on the back end of it a much stronger mentally and even spiritually. So I think, I like I said, go out and challenge yourself. So when you're in that last phase of your life, realizing, the days ahead are less than the days behind. And then focus on what's important in life. And anyone can do that.
Thank you so much for being here. I enjoyed speaking with you, and everything that you said. It was awesome. And I hope our viewers and listeners enjoyed it. You were amazing. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for listening. Go like, share, comment, subscribe now, become a Patreon member so you can get full access to our bonus episodes and extra goodies that only our Patreons get. And tune in next week for our next episode. Thank you so much for listening.